I'm going to play you a short excerpt from Chopin's first ballade 3 times. Can you tell me the differences between these 3? Here we go. Now leave your thoughts in the comments below. Go ahead, pause the video and write what you heard. No, really, you can pause the video and drop down to the comments. I'll wait. This is a fun game for us to play here, but my point is actually this. All that thinking that you just did, all of that analysis, maybe you even went back and listened twice or 3 times. Well, one of the most important things to learn as a musician is how to listen to ourselves as we play and have these same sort of reflections on the music while we play it. We can start learning how to do that by listening to others like we just did, or by listening to ourselves when we aren't playing. I'm going to come back to that point in a minute, but for right now, let's compare notes about those 3 excerpts that I played earlier. In the first excerpt, the tone and the color of the playing is pretty warm. The dynamics as a whole are pretty reserved. There's a lot of push and pull within each phrase. There are many occasions where one phrase was executed as an echo of the previous phrase, and the beats are ever so slightly separated between the hands. So often, the left hand will arrive to a beat slightly earlier than the right hand. And lastly, that large and unexpected change in harmony when we move to a C7 chord near the end of the excerpt, that's approached by way of subito piano on the downbeat, along with a pretty large retard that leads us there. In the second excerpt, the tone and the color of the playing is a bit brighter and more strident. The dynamics are more varied throughout, and they approach even forte at the largest points. There's a bit less push and pull compared to the first version, and more often, phrases build upon each other rather than being echoes of the previous. The left hand and the right hand beats are still slightly separated, and the large, unexpected change in harmony on that C7 chord at the end is much more linked to the previous phrase dynamically, although it's still approached by a retard. In the third excerpt, the tone is on the warm side again, but it's a bit more projected than it was in the first version. The dynamic texture is fairly stagnant, but the melody is allowed to pop out here and there. Phrases are generally linked together, one flowing nicely into the next and continuing to build throughout most of the excerpt. The left hand and the right hand beats are no longer separated slightly, they happen together. And that C7 at the end of the excerpt is approached with the least amount of retard and also the least dynamic change of the 3 versions. Now, those were a lot of words that kind of sum up the intricacies and the technicality of what was executed and how we can relate that, between us as we talk about music. But in a more broad statement or a more musical statement, the first version was indulgent and it was very wandering, right? Whereas the second version was more grand and it had kind of a better foundation, almost like the second version was a singer singing strongly and confidently, whereas the first version was more like in someone's own mind and their own mind wanderings and where their brain and their thoughts are leading them just from one thought to the next thought. And the third version is something like a balance between the two, right? There's the least amount of wandering, things linked together the most predictable way. Does that mean it's the least musical? Not necessarily. All of those things are up to interpretation, but all of those choices that were made, the technical choices, all play a part in leading to that one musical goal. So how many similarities do we have between our answers? There are lots of words that can be used to describe things, so there are a lot of correct ways of thinking about this. Now, the big question is, how do we apply this to our own playing? Almost everyone on the planet, actually literally over 90% of the world's population, own smartphones. This thing right here. This is your absolute best tool in learning about your own playing. All you need to do is make a simple either voice recording or a video recording right in one of the apps that comes on the phone. You don't even need to purchase another app. Get in the habit of making recordings and listening to them actually right in the middle of your practice session. Now, on the most basic level, and many of us can probably already listen like this while we're playing, we can reflect on playing the right notes and the right rhythms. If in your practice you do realize when you play wrong notes and rhythms, it's your ear that's guiding you to that conclusion in real time. Following that, we can start to listen for correct articulations and dynamics. Our ears are the only parts of our bodies that can accurately tell us what we executed at the keyboard. Now, if your mind wasn't completely blown by that, let me say it again in a slightly different way. We normally think about playing the piano with the fingers and the hands, right? Our muscle response in the fingers and the hands executes something that we think we intend. But our ears have to tell us if we truly achieved that intention. So as you practice, what are you reflecting on? How engaged are your ears as you play? Now, if you're getting value out of this video, be sure and give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. One of the big benefits of having a teacher is that every week, that teacher helps to train your ears to hear things that their own masterfully trained ears are hearing in your playing. What I like to do as a teacher is actually ask a lot of questions during lessons. Most new students of mine look at me like I'm from another planet or something when this happens in our first lesson because most teachers just tell you what to do. But the thing is, telling doesn't teach. Telling relies on luck and actually a great amount of talent in the student to translate one application of telling a particular thing to the next time that it's appropriate. So instead, I ask questions. Questions like, what did you think of your tempo? How were your rhythms in bar 8? Did you miss any articulations in that first phrase? Was your tempo consistent? How big were your dynamic changes and were they appropriate for the piece or the section you're playing? And maybe with more advanced students, those questions change into things like, why did you choose to phrase the second statement of the theme that way? Did your rubato maintain line and direction? What did your right hand fourth finger feel in the coda? I'm bringing up all these questions because they're examples of exactly the types of questions that you can ask about your own playing when you record yourself on your phone and listen back. Be your own teacher. Imagine that a teacher is listening to your recording. What would they say? What would they ask you about? What would they want you to work on? Most of the time, until we become professional pianists, what you think of your playing while you play will be very different than what you think of your playing when you listen back to it afterward. It's the listening back that's going to give you a much more accurate picture of your playing, and it's the perfect way to start or to continue to train your ears. So keep your phone handy, make it a part of every day's practice routine. If you have a teacher, pay attention to the types of questions they ask you and how they guide you through music. They are giving you massive hints on a weekly basis of how to learn to listen. And if you don't have a teacher, start by using those dozen or so questions that I gave you earlier as a great starting point in your own reflections on your playing. Before we wrap up today, I wanted to mention that I do offer one-on-one lessons to pianists anywhere in the world with at least a cell phone and an internet connection. So if you're interested in having lessons with me, I will leave a link in the description to my website with more info and a super quick contact form that you can fill out to get in touch. As always, practice smarter, not harder, and I'll see you next time you visit Pianist Academy.